Well, Terry Kreuger, my friend from 21 years now.
Wow, that's amazing. Eh?
21 years ago, I met you. Welcome on our little podcast.
Thanks, man.
where
Great to be here,
we'd love to get to know you a little bit better,
Yeah.
talk a bit, and see what's happening.
So cool.
I want to help our church connect. You're here to do an ordination, but before
Yes.
that, we've been very vocally supportive of Ikaya Likababa
Yes.
for a number of years,
Yeah,
almost since when we started.
Yeah.
And Ikaya Likababa is kind of a project of Solid Ground Church,
Yeah.
and you started Solid Ground
Yes.
Church. I'd love to hear a little bit of the story. How did you come to have the audacity to think that you can plant a church? And how did you tell me a little bit about the early days of the process of starting Solid Ground?
Yeah. Well, when we planted it, so I guess the story starts, we were at a church in South Africa called Glenridge. And we went away as a leadership. It wasn't a getaway, but it was just like the guy that was leading the church, Chris, would take us away every now and then, get us like kind of off campus. And so we went away on a leadership, I guess, getaway, like just for a day on the Saturday. And we were, 30 minutes out of town, whatever. And there was during the worship, the guys there played an African worship song. They played this song in Zulu. And Sandy and I, independently of each other, heard God say exactly the same thing during this worship song. This is what worship is going to be like in your church in Empangeni. And we weren't even thinking about planting a church. We certainly weren't thinking about Empangeni.
Wow.
But God spoke to us both individually in that worship set. And so at the coffee break, I'm like, Sandals, I have to talk to you. And she's like, no, I have to talk to you. And so we got together over a coffee, just at the coffee break. And I'm like, man, God said this. And she's like, God said the same thing to me. So that was really the initiation of it, you know. And so when we planted the church, because of that, it was right coming out of apartheid. It was 1994.
Right.
We had our first free democratic election in April, and we planted in the July.
Wow.
And we definitely had heard God about a multicultural church in South Africa. In those days, it was quite a radical concept. But we definitely had heard God for a multicultural church. And so we gave it a multicultural name. So Solid Ground, when we planted it, was Tandaza Covenant Church.
Wow.
And Tandaza is the Zulu word for prayer. My house will be a house of prayer for all nations. So so that
I did
was
not know that.
Yeah. So that was the early days, Tandaza Covenant Church. And we multicultural, we gave it a multicultural name, Part of it Zulu, part of it English. And
not to give away your age, but 94, how long have you been with the Lord at that point? What was your walk with the Lord? Because starting a church is obviously, sounds like a big deal thing.
Yes. Yeah, and it was. I think I'd probably been saved about 5 years by that time.
Wow.
Yeah. Been in two churches. The church that we planted from was Glenridge. Was a real base church. It was a real firing church in the NCMR kind of context. You know what I mean? And I want to say I was the second or third church planted in NCMR.
Wow.
At that time,
No ways.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so.
So what does it look like? We feel a call to go to Empangeni to start a church.
Yeah.
What does your launch program look like?
Yeah.
What does your first Sunday look like?
No, listen, I always get nervous telling these stories because they're very atypical,
Okay.
But I'm convinced of this, that for me accountability is no surprises. Like if I'm accountable to somebody and they are surprised by something they hear about me, it means I haven't been accountable. You should hear from me first, And so Sandals and I both got very nervous about this thing. Like, hey, we've heard God for something. And so right away, we made an appointment to see Chris, who was leading the church. And the crazy thing, he told us later that he was washing some dishes while we were on our way there. And he said to Meryl, his wife, I think Tika and Sandy are coming. And we'd made the appointment. He said, I think they're coming to tell us they want to plant a church. At that point, I'd been on eldership for 19 days. I'd been on eldership for 19 days when God spoke that thing to us. And so I was absolutely convinced I was going to talk to Chris. And Chris was going to say, that's wonderful. Just sit back down. Let's talk about this again in 2 years,
Yeah.
And
were you working for the church at that time?
Yes, I was a full-time elder.
Wow.
And so we sat with them and we were both so nervous, I said, Chris, I think God's telling us about planting a church, Didn't even want to get the words out. I was so scared. And Chris was like, yeah, I think it's a great idea. And I was like, I thought I was going to throw up. I'm like, is there no adult supervision? I mean, like, shouldn't somebody tell me just to back off, you know? And he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And so originally that was in the September. We were going to plant in January. And church planters training was a very new thing. Chris, along with some other guys, had launched church planters training. And so he asked me to delay and do the church planters training, which we did. In those days, it was 6 months on the road. We visited a number of base churches. And I think there were 5 couples that did church planters training with us. And so those 5 couples, part of church planters training was they came and helped us plant the church. So they spent about 2 weeks in Empangeni with us, launching the church and getting the church going and praying and knocking on doors. In those days, we just shared a story where I said there was no internet when we planted, no cell phones.
Right.
So it was raw, you know, you knocked on doors and told people you're planting a church down the road. So, yeah, that was
the early days.
Yeah, it was the early days, you know.
Wow, amazing.
But, yeah, we got the church going. I think there was probably 30 or 40 people that showed up on the first Sunday, you know, including the 5 couples that were there, obviously.
Wow.
And we were off to the races, man.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fast forward just a little bit. I met you and Sandy 21 years ago.
Yeah.
Kathy and I were at our first NCMI event was called LTT in Los Angeles.
Yeah, yeah.
And when we met you, you were leading a church. Was it the south side of LA?
Yeah.
We were there. Tell me a little bit about that, because rumor is there was not a lot of people, but a lot of death.
Yeah, you know, I think just part of that story, Sandals and I always had felt called to Mexico. At that time, I don't know if it's different now, but at that time, 30 years ago, Mexico was incredibly hard to get into as a pastor, as a missionary, whatever it was, you know.
So this was while you were in South Africa, you felt called to Mexico.
Yes.
How did that come up on your radar?
It had to be a God thing. You know, my mom tells me I was born in Zambia. I mean, I told my mom when I got saved and said, I've got a heart for this. And we started doing ministry into Mexico, even from South Africa. And my mom shared a story with me. She said, you know, this is so crazy. She said, when you were a little boy in Zambia, you used to ask me, Mommy, will you take me to Mexico? No. And she said, I had no idea how you knew what Mexico was, or even if you knew Mexico was a country. So I don't know, but it's a God thing, you know.
Wow.
Somehow God put that nation and those people in my heart from the early days, you know. So I guess as we started to progress, we really felt like that. We really felt called to the nations. There was a big thrust in church planting into the nations in those days, and we really felt called to Mexico. Hard to get into. So a guy opened a door for us to come to America and to plant. And we were going to plant in San Diego. We're like, we'll get as close to Mexico as we can. San Diego's a border city. We could travel into Mexico. And right before we left South Africa, one of the team guys called and said, man, there's this little church in Los Angeles that's got in trouble and they need a pastor and they need it now. You know, our paperwork was already processed. We were leaving in a month's time or whatever.
To Mexico?
Well, no, to
LA.
To go to the church. And then a year later, plant in San Diego. We were going into Seattle initially. Wow. And so I called the guy in Seattle and said, man, I've promised you a year, but this church has come available. And to his credit, he just said, man, I'll never stand in the way of what God's doing for you. And so we went and took over this little church in Los Angeles. It was, you know, there was a handful of people there. We were told some things about the church, which turned out not to be super accurate. But when we got there, there's a handful of people, I think about 5 people, and $340,000 debt.
Wow.
Was the debt on that church when we got there, you know.
Wow.
So, you know, we had told there was a way out. There was no way out of that amount of debt, not for a church that size.
Right.
Some of it was IRS debt.
Wow.
You know, some of it was debt to the Southern Baptist Convention. It was an absolute mess. And for a while, it felt like, you know, that wasn't the picture that was presented.
Right.
What was presented was $70,000 debt, but there's a way out.
Right.
You know, but it felt like for a while, man, every page we turned was like, oh, wow. You know, more debt, more surprises, more this, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but God had his hand on that church, man. right from the beginning.
I'm a practical thinker.
Yes.
5 people,
Yes.
a lot of money.
Yes.
You're new to America.
Yes.
You're new to the LA culture, the American culture. What does the first few steps look like for you to turn a church like that around?
Yeah.
And I think when I met you, it had already grown quite a lot.
Yes.
Got out of date. How did you do that?
Yeah, so I think, the early days, like I said, that the amount of debt and us working our way out of that amount of debt took a little while. But there was a little, so it was the church building, the auditorium, there was a preschool attached to it, and there was a little house at the back of the property. So we moved into the house. So again, there wasn't money for salary. We didn't draw salary for a year, but we had a place to live. We had our family around us. We had enough. We were surviving. There was a little bit of money coming from South Africa, and so we lived on that. But I remember Sandy. Because you show up and you preach like it's your last sermon.
Yeah.
You preach. You throw out the net. You take up an offering. You do all the things. And Sandy would say, "Babe, there's 5 people. Like, how do you keep going every Sunday? Because for a while it was that. It was literally a handful of people." And so Sandy said, "How do you keep going?" And I've always been the 5-year guy, I always say, like, in 5 years, it'll all look different.
Wow.
And so that was my mantra, We'd be walking back across the parking lot every Sunday, and Sandy would say, "Babe, how do you do that?" I'm like, it's all going to look different in 5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And it didn't take 5. it did look radically different. But within about a year or so, we started to see some people added and...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you, while you were there in LA, you were starting to do more ministry into Mexico.
Yeah.
Is that something that's still continuing today? And what does ministry in Mexico look like when you don't live there?
Yeah, the early days of ministry into Mexico was challenging. Because we would come from South Africa. We had one contact there. In the end, he turned out not to be the greatest contact. We found out later that he wasn't viewed with a lot of kind of respect or whatever you would say in that context. And so us trying to go through him was actually working against us, But in the early days, I couldn't get a pastor to meet with me. So we would minister in prisons. We'd minister in drug rehab homes. Wow. That's what we would do. We would go down there and just like any opportunity we had to go minister,
Mostly Ensenada at first?
Yeah, Ensenada.
Okay. Wow.
Now, Sandy was always worried about me when I went into the prisons, She's like, "Baby, you sure they're going to let you out?" But, that's where we started,
Wow.
Crazy story. I met this lady in one of the drug rehab homes, and her one arm was just chewed up and deformed. And over a period of time, got to know her a little bit better, And I said to her, do you mind if I ask what happened to your arm, And she said, "I got too close to the African lion at the zoo in Mexico City."
No way.
So for us coming from Africa to meet a lady in Mexico that had been mauled by an African lion was quite wild, She got too close and the lion just grabbed her. And,
no way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Guess the safety spaces and that were different, But yeah, so that was it. We started to work into Mexico because we were in Los Angeles. That was the thing. We had this heart to plant in San Diego so we could minister into Mexico. Los Angeles is about a 90-minute drive from the border on a good day. So it wasn't like God was asking us to plant in Minnesota.
Sure.
We thought we could take over this church in Los Angeles and still do what God had called us to do into Mexico,
Right.
And so because of the distance and that, it's drivable. So there were years we did 50 trips into Mexico because we would drive down and have lunch with the pastor and drive back.
Wow.
It was drivable,
Wow.
And then ministry, and we started to partner with more and more churches. And a mutual friend of ours, Jody Romero, carries a lot more of that responsibility now. Just with me living in Denver, it's that much harder for me to get into,
Right.
But I felt stirred of late again just to get back into Mexico, So Jody and I are working on that. Like, what does that look like again for me to get back in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm asking these questions about planting and taking over a church, starting a work in Mexico. Just these practical handles are so helpful for us, especially where we're at as a church, of thinking of reaching more and going more and sending more people out. So it's very, very helpful to hear your story.
That's great.
I want to switch, fast forward a few more years. 614 started in 2014.
Yeah.
And at this point, you had been ministering in Chicago with the church that we were at there for a number of years, and our friendship had, over time gone deeper and deeper. So at this Equip in 2014, Kathy and I had already lived here in Columbus.
Yeah.
We came here for work, and we went to the conference, and we're like, okay, Lord, what do you have? And one of the sessions we both felt, similar to your story, we both felt like God is asking us to start a church in Columbus. And that made no sense to me. No sense whatsoever.
Does church planting ever make sense? That's the question we have to ask ourselves.
No sense. I remember at the end of that day, that evening, I spoke to you. I said, TK, can we get a lunch tomorrow? We have this idea. It doesn't make any sense. Can you talk me out of it? And so we're sitting at this.
I obviously did a very poor job of talking you out of it.
Well, it sounded something like this. Well, how hard can it be?
I guess you found out.
Yeah, we did find out. But I want to honor you very publicly to say your words weren't just how hard can it be. It was followed with whatever you need will be there.
Yes.
If you have 5 people in a room, we'll come and help. We'll come and teach. We'll come and help lay foundations. And true to your word, I think it was 6 or 7 weeks later, you were in our house when there were a number of people in our living room and helping us lay the foundations of what we are enjoying today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're a man of your word, and I want to honor you for that. And I say 614 it is what it is because you helped lay foundations early
Very
on.
honoring.
Do you remember in the first few years, you preached this series on the 7 firsts that Jesus spoke?
Yeah.
Man, I've preached that thing a number of times over and over.
I need to preach that again.
Okay, so let's step back a little bit. There's a lot of young people in our church, and there's a lot of calling on our church to plant churches, to plant sites, and to go. Give me some thoughts. What are key ingredients a young man, a young woman, a young couple need, or older, to start thinking about approaching church planting? What's a few of the most important things to think about?
Yeah, when I think back to my story, I think there was 2 things. The church that we were in, Glenridge, was a real base church, and they did a lot of training. There was always something going on midweek. We had a guy there by the name of Nigel Day-Lewis, affectionately known as the Prof. Real smart guy. He did Old Testament survey, New Testament survey, eschatology. You know what I mean? We did all of that stuff, which later became the foundation of like a 2-year theological course. We just wasn't a 2-year theological course then. It was just a number of classes that we did. But Sandals and I were just like, we were at everything we could be at, because we had felt the stirring, not of church planted. This was in the 2 years before God had spoken to us, the 2 years we were at the church. Just like, man, if there was something going on, we stepped in. And that was like in the early days of our marriage. Sandals and I just covenanted, and we just said, man, if God opens a door, we will go through it by faith.
Wow.
If we've got the faith to step into it, we'll step in and trust God for the difference.
Right.
So whatever it was, whether it was, in those days we were planting internationally. So my first church plant was Singapore,
Wow.
and I went on my own. We were planting a church. NCMI was planting a church in Singapore. There was an opportunity to go. We had faith. We had no money.
Yeah.
And I said to Sandals, you got to go on the next one. Just this thing in the east, in the Far East, I've seen millions of people that had never heard the name of Jesus. Had such an impact on me. And the next one was in Hong Kong, and Sandy and I went on that thing. And again, we had no money.
Was that short term or like
just short term, just 2 weeks. Yeah, okay. 2 weeks. But we went and we handed out flyers. I know a guy that well that's been here, Ash Bell. Ash Bell and I in Hong Kong handing out flyers, and we would watch. We only had a limited amount of flyers, and so we would see these guys take the flyer in Chinese and read it and chuck it in the trash, and we'd go. There's actually a photograph of me, like I've tipped over in the trash and my legs are up in the air, but I'm trying to fish out one of those flyers so we can smooth it out and hand it to somebody else. We would just. So I think that certainly that's part of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just.
Yeah.
We go through every door that God opens by faith, whether it's training, whether it's a short-term mission, whether it's a trip, whatever it is, man. If we convince God's in it, we don't say no.
Right.
And Sandals and I have held that now. I'm 62 years old. Man, if God opens the door, we go.
Right.
You know what I mean? We don't you don't play safe with the Lord. If God says something, you step into it.
Yeah.
I know I'm teased for it a lot. And people think it's just a saying for me, but I actually live this, man. Load, fire, aim. We talk about things on the eldership, and I say, let's pull the trigger. Let's see what the Lord can do. You know what I mean? And it's like, but yeah, so you don't have to be that radical or that silly about it, however you look at it. But there is certainly that thing, man. You know what I mean? It's like, who are we trying to protect ourselves from? From God?
Yeah.
I don't think I need protection from God. If God's calling me, the grace will be there.
Yeah.
And that's so, like, if we've got faith for it, we step in,
Yeah.
So I think in terms of preparation, man, be at everything, get involved in everything, have a working knowledge of every aspect of church life.
Right.
Have a working knowledge of some of these things. I know you've written a great book on foundations, Christian foundations. We need to be familiar with those things. We need to know practices of how to lead people to the Lord. All of those things, man. Those are upskilling.
Yeah.
That if God and you can do that anyway. If you do all of those things and you never plant a church, think what an amazing blessing you would be to your church.
Right.
But if you do all of those things and God calls you to plant a church, those are going to be absolutely necessary skills when you're down the road. So
before you planted Tandaza, House of Prayer, man, I glad I found that out today.
Nations,
before you planted that, how often had you preached? What had you led before that point?
So in the previous church that I was at, like I said, Glenridge was the second church. The previous church, I led a youth group.
Okay.
It was quite short-lived because I got this job transfer, and that's eventually how I ended up at Glenridge. But yeah, at Glenridge, like I said, man, I stepped into everything, So I preached once or twice at Glenridge at that stage. I mean,
once or twice?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, well, Chris asked me to preach, and I preached on the Sunday night, and then he said to me a couple of weeks later, man, guys really enjoyed your preaching, I want to put you up again in a couple of weeks. And I said, wait, but I preached everything I knew last time. You're going to have to give me some time. I literally, I'm not going to come up with another sermon in another 3 weeks, bro. You're going to have to give me some space. But like I said, on some of those training classes, doors started to open for me to teach on some of those training classes.
Sure.
And some of those kind of things,
But it wasn't a lot of Sunday preaching, leadership experience you had before you started planting.
No.
I think that's good.
No, not a lot.
That's
I led a Connect group, and I think a Connect group is such a good, you call them life groups.
We call them life groups,
life groups. So I had led a life group for a number of years. And we learned some principles in there, you learn pastoral principles in there. People come to you for counsel, whatever. So you learn those skills,
Right.
Our Connect group grew and multiplied. You learn those skills. You learn to identify leaders. Like, hey, who's the guy that can take 20 of these people, and so that we've got more room here, So I think some of those things, Jody again says leading kids ministry was ideal for church planting because you had to learn to schedule, you had to learn to build a team, you had to put a curriculum together. So I think all of these things, man, are just, whatever it is that we can put our hand to, that God's calling us to, we put our hand to it by faith, we step in by faith. Yeah. God will use it all down the road,
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You're at 614 this weekend to ordain an eldership couple.
Yes.
What is an elder? Let's grassroots here. What is an elder?
Yeah. Well, again, I think... maybe different thoughts and different perspectives. And I think even around that language, I think there's a little bit of confusion sometimes around that language. For us, all elders are pastors, all pastors are elders. Mm-hmm. And so there is a huge pastoral element that comes, What does pastoral look like, man? It looks like caring for people,
Right.
We get such a great example of that in Jesus, the great shepherd, the great pastor. And so it really looks like taking care of people, praying for them, loving on them, caring for them. And that never goes away. It absolutely never does. We've got a couple now. I think I shared with you a little bit, man. She had this massive e-bike accident, tore her wrist up, tore her elbow up. What does it look like? We had leftover cheesecake We had some people over at our house. We had leftover cheesecake. We call them. Hey, can we bring you dessert? We go over there and have cheesecake with them. You know, that's pastoral. It's just showing people that they love, that they cared for, that because they're not coming to church, they're all laid up with injuries. Man, they still thought of, they still loved, they still cared for, they still prayed for, you know. So I think certainly the pastoral element of that, you know, whether that comes to leading again a life group or leading a team, whatever it is, you pastor that team, you take care of that team.
Right.
The other side of that, I think, is the governmental, the leadership aspect of that thing, you know, which for me again has to come with that pastoral heart.
Yeah.
But it is the leadership, it is the government, it is making decisions about the life of the church, the direction of the church, all of those kind of things. For me, I want those to be spiritual decisions.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
I want those to be spiritual decisions, you know. We pray before our elders meeting. Sometimes we'll have worship. And in my naive way of thinking, I want to think, man, we want to come from the presence of God and make decisions about the life of the church.
Right.
You know? So yeah, there's that aspect. Those two aspects of it for me, you know. This pastoral thing and the leadership thing, the governmental thing, yeah.
So oftentimes there's an eldership board, and then there's a lead pastor or a pastoral team that's separate to that. So just one layer deeper, why not that? Why? I
mean, I guess the simple answer for that is we don't see it in Scripture.
Okay.
You know, so I think, you know, the distinction between the lead elder and the elder, or the lead pastor and the pastors, it's such a faint line. But it's more like the captain of the team. You know, there are some decisions that the team captain now has to make. We've heard everybody's perspective. The team captain has to make it.
Right.
That doesn't separate him from the team.
Right.
You know,
right.
When I get up on a Sunday morning, I say, "Hi, I'm Terry Kreuger. I'm one of the pastors here."
Right.
You know, it's not I'm the lead guy and everybody else is below me. You know, so there is this equality, and yet in that lead elder role, the role that you and I carry in our churches, there has to be that extra level of visionary. We've heard everybody's decision. This is where we've come to. Right. You know, right. And then I think for everybody else on the team, and they have to treat that decision as if they made it, as if that was the decision. You know,
right.
And then we move forward on the team. I don't think you can. We could try, but I don't think you can overestimate unity on an eldership team. You know, Dudley taught us years and years ago. Dudley's the founder, the starter of this thing that we are part of, New Covenant Ministries. And he taught us 30, 40 years ago. He would always say this: as goes the eldership team, so goes the church. You know? Yeah. So you can't bring stuff into the church that isn't in your eldership team. If your eldership team isn't in unity, you'll struggle to find unity in the life of the church.
Right.
You know, if your eldership team isn't caught up in prayer, you'll find it hard to break prayer into the life of the church. You know? Right. So as goes the eldership team, so goes the church, man. It's absolutely a radical and powerful thing, and I think it's by God's design.
Right.
You know?
I find it interesting in the ESV translation, which is the one I read the most. The word pastor doesn't even show up.
Yeah.
And I think it's the NIV in Ephesians 4 when it talks about apostle, prophet, evangelist. NIV says pastor, teacher. Yes. ESV says shepherd, teacher.
Oh, there you go.
So your
interesting.
Your pastoral, your shepherding, your caring. This is what you were talking about in your first point there.
Yeah, I think there's so much, you know, that Jesus says, you know, like my sheep know my voice. You know, and again, Dudley taught us, man, pastors can't be so far ahead of the sheep that they can't reach back and touch the sheep.
Right.
Like, you know, so there is this personal thing, and we were just laughing and joking. And I said, when we planted the church in Empangeni, we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have the internet. You know, it's like you try and tell somebody that now you're going to plant a church, you're not allowed to have the internet, and you can't use a cell phone. They'd be like, impossible.
No website.
Impossible. You know what I mean? No social media. But I think back those early days, and I mean, you remember those days when we just had landlines and there wasn't a caller ID, right?
Right.
And so I think about this. It's like, you know, in the context of my sheep know my voice, there's not one time that Sandy called me or I called Sandy and I go, "Hi, babe," and she goes, "Who's this?"
Right.
Because she knows my voice.
Right.
You know what I mean? I know her voice.
Right.
You know, and I think there's such a lesson for that in shepherding. You know what I mean? Like if Jesus says, "My sheep know my voice," like how do you create that? How do your sheep know your voice? It comes through time. There's no microwave. There's no fairy dust. It comes through time with people, them knowing that you care for them. You know what I mean? Them, you stepping into their lives, you know, which is it's a lesson for all pastors, you know, not just for us that lead the church. Every pastor should be like that, you know.
Yeah.
Every guy on our team should be like that.
Love it. Love it. All right, one more question.
Yes, sir.
Favorite Bible verse?
Well, again, many. I've heard many people say this is my favorite Bible verse, and I'm like, that's not what you said last week. but I do have one.
Okay.
That's Romans 10:13.
Okay.
Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. It's been something that's carried me for 35 years. I found out recently that a lot of police departments use 10:13 for officer down, and it comes from that scripture. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. So when cops get on the radio and they say 10:13, 10:13, it's officer down. It's like, we coming, we'll save you.
Wow.
Yeah, I found out that's not all police departments use, but I found many of them do, and they use that, that was the foundation of it, you know. But I think for me, I mean, the one thing that church should do better than any other organization, I'm sure there's other organizations that can feed the poor better and educate people better, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things. The one thing we should have a handle on, Dave, is that we should know how to bring people to salvation. And so that thing has been such a foundational thing for me, man. Everybody who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. You know? So I think that evangelistic thing just stirs in us. I know you carry it as well. You were telling me amazing how many people have been saved. I think you said over the summer or in the last year. I can't remember.
The last year, yeah.
Yeah, the last year. You know, we should all give ourselves to that a little bit as well, you know.
Yeah.
I think even like we talk about the pastoral, right? We talk about the pastoral, and I think, again, every pastor should have something of an evangelistic edge. You know, you think about Jesus, Luke 15, you know, when he says he leaves the 99 and goes after the one that's lost.
Right.
You know, so we do need to take care of the 99. I've always kind of wondered if I'm the 99, not the one. If we're the one, we love it.
Right.
If I'm the 99, I'm like, why are you leaving me to go after that skinny sheep? He's rebellious. You know, there's wolves, they can attack us. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that is the true heart of the shepherd. Like, yes, I am looking after the flock, but I've always got my eye out for the one that's not here. You know, Sandals and I used to use this thing like there's always room for one more.
Yeah.
Whether that's at our dinner table, whether it's in the car on the way to church, whether it's at church, whatever it is, there's always room for one more. You know, we always want one more person around the table, one more person in the life group, one more person at church. You know, we want to see that, you know. And then Jesus says this. He says, the shepherd leaves the 99 and he goes after the one. He says, and he searches for it until he finds it.
Wow.
Until he finds it.
Wow.
He doesn't give up. Like, I looked over this hill, I looked over that hill.
Right.
Sorry, bud.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like he looks for that sheep until he finds it. It speaks of great effort, you know?
Right.
You know what I mean? The lost sheep, so I'm preaching now.
No, it's good.
The lost sheep, yeah, great effort. The lost coin, great value. Shows how God sees the lost, eh? Great effort to return the lost. Great value, this lost coin. The woman sweeps the house, yeah? Great effort, great value, and then the lost son, great love.
Wow.
Yeah?
Wow.
Beautiful picture of how God sees the lost, and what a picture for us, eh? You know, we put in great effort to return great value because of God's great love.
Wow.
Romans 10:13.
Amazing.
Yeah, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
TK,
buddy.
thank you so much
Thanks,
for this
man. So much
conversation.
fun. Yeah. Loved it, eh?
Love you.
Thank you. Love you, bro. Thanks for the privilege. Thanks for the honor. Looking forward to the weekend.
Oh, yeah. Good.
Great.